since last we spoke, there has been a peace deal announced, as we've noted a couple of times, with Sudan. And these stories have been reported with all the media, the Jerusalem Post, reporting the fact that it's the third Arab state in the last few weeks to announce ties with Israel. There was a very interesting piece at the BESA website, which is the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, and that was by Haim Koren, where he basically gave an overview of the history between Israel and Sudan. It's a history that he puts forward that contradicts a lot of the history books, I have to say, because he says that Sudan had very positive relations with the new state of Israel and through to the time of Golda Meir, but he seems to have conveniently forgotten that there were 6 Sudanese units that joined the Egyptians fighting in 1948 against the state of Israel. So there has been quite a complicated history between the two countries. And of course, Sudan in recent years has been working quite closely with Iran. And there was the bombing by Israel of a munitions factory near Khartoum in 2012, which was making missiles for Iran that were being shipped to Lebanon and also into Gaza. So Sudan has for quite some years been a conduit for weapons coming through from Iran to the enemies of Israel to put Israel under pressure, both from the west in the Gaza and in the north from Lebanon. So, Boaz, just in brief, the situation with Sudan being welcomed into the Friends of Israel Club now, on the face of it, looks a positive move. It could really change the lie of the land.
Sudan is the issue of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and what you didn't say, sorry, in your review is another good thing that happened with Sudan. Sudan, I don't know if they helped or didn't help, but they didn't interrupt in all the procedure of making Aliyah for a lot of Jewish people from Ethiopia, because they have a border with Ethiopia. And the position of Sudan in Africa is very important as a country as well. So when we arrange all the big campaign of bringing the Jewish people from Ethiopia to Israel, Sudan, I don't know if they help, but they didn't interrupt. So this is, again, in the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Don't forget that Mr. Trump, President Trump, arranged that deal together with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, and everybody here in Israel is happy to have another agreement with another Arab country. But Sudan, they are far away from here. The influence of Sudan on the Arab countries as Arab countries is not so important as it was 60 or 70 years ago, when they sent the troops here to Israel to fight against us in order not to allow us to establish the country in 48. So it's a different Sudan. And don't forget that they paid $350 million compensation to the families of the Americans that, you know what happened in the terror attacks.
But Boaz, that's just the point. They've paid the $350 million because they have been a state sponsor of terrorism. This is a country that has been renegade.
It's a deal.
Are we safe? Yeah, are we safe?
Is that $350 million is the price of this peace treaty? Is that the price? Time will tell. I don't believe so. Time will tell. And I don't see the streets of Tel Aviv washed with Sudanese, and also I don't see the streets of Khartoum washed with Israelis, because we have nothing to look over there and they have nothing to look over here, except of asking all the people, all the refugees that came here from southern Sudan to go back to the country without any harm.
Okay, well, that's just the final point. I'll just make this point about that. You bring it up. People may not know around the world that there are quite a number of Sudanese refugees in Israel. They've come through crossing the Sinai. They've come through, and many of them are refugees who have been threatened by the regime there in Sudan, and they've fled for their lives. Now, there's been a lot of debate whether they should have come to Israel, because you're meant to go to the first safe place, and they crossed through Egypt, and in some cases circular routes via Libya and all sorts of things. But the guy in charge of Sudan these days is a man who has a very patchy record on human rights and was supposedly involved in instructing a massacre of people only a year or two ago. So a lot of these people in Israel, the Sudanese refugees who've been given humanitarian right to stay, are fearful that if they go back, they may walk back into something very, very difficult. And that is something that has to be investigated very thoroughly before we send them back, because we can't be seen to be sending people back to a potential death situation in Sudan.
But they gave them a certain of guarantee that when they will go back, no harm will happen. And
I would assume that guarantee is going to be held.
Israel is involved in so many things. I don't see an interest of Israel in Sudan except of commercial interest, and that's it. There is no Jewish community over there to save them or to preserve them. There is nothing to do in Sudan for us. If I offer you a trip to Sudan, you can do it.
I think we have to look at the bigger picture, if I may, and just disagree there, because having reported on intelligence matters and terrorism, one thing is very clear, that Sudan has been used as a corridor for weapons transfers to weapons auctions in the Sinai Desert, including weapons coming from the Libyan failed state since Gaddafi collapsed. And Sudan has been very much turning a blind eye to this. Now, for Israel's security, this is quite a big step, because if indeed Sudan does fall into line and play by the rules of the game, it's going to block off a major highway of weapons transportation from the Persian Gulf through from Iran. And it's going to be a big blow from Iran and the Yemenite conflict as well.
I agree with that. But for me as a citizen, and for you as a citizen of Israel, you don't look at the map and say to your wife, I think this winter we'll go to Sudan. This is not a peace. This is another point in the world that you can put your spies over there in order to protect your country. I believe in that, and you're right. But we had a great success before. So why to have a peace agreement with them? I'm not against the peace agreement. I am for it, 100%, 200%. But it's like, it's like to have a peace agreement with people in the moon. Let's do it, and maybe we'll have a point in the moon.
I think maybe a little simplistic there with respect, Boaz, because I think that Benjamin Netanyahu will have been pleased with this deal, because I think the security establishment feel it strengthens the fight against the weapons traffickers from that part of the world. But we're going to have to move on. Yeah, we're going to have to move on.
Just the last thing about it. I agree. I'm happy. I'm happy to each and every country in the world to have a relationship with Israel. The normality, it's good and nothing but good. But
Absolutely.
To see, to look at the interest, it's more interest of security and things like that, and commercial, and nothing but that.